down. Thank you. A letter dated the 19th of May.
Yes, I can.
From Priti Patel, then MP for Whittam, to, it seems, Vince Cable. Dear Vincent.
Yep.
I've been contacted by a constituent who runs a local sub-post office who has inquired as to which minister will have responsibility for the post office. They have quite a serious issue with the Horizon system, which, as you're aware, is the IT platform which post offices use to conduct their transactions. Prior to the election, the previous shadow minister was willing to arrange a meeting to discuss the issue, and I wonder whether something could be set up with a new minister once they're in situ. That's you, essentially.
Yes.
Was this correspondence drawn to your attention? This is the day before you took up office, the day before Sir Alan's letter to you.
No, I can't remember that at all being brought to my attention.
Ought it to have been brought to your attention?
Probably yes. I know Priti Patel asked some written parliamentary questions, which I answered, as you'll be aware, but I wasn't aware she was seeking a meeting. Okay,
thank you. I'm going to look now, before we come to the meeting of the 7th of October with Sir Alan, to a series of letters from MPs, either directly to you or forwarding correspondence that they'd received from their constituents, describing problems with the Horizon system and prosecutions arising from Horizon, and a number of written parliamentary questions. Can we look at those, I hope, in chronological order? Can we look at poll 0041 7098, which I think the pack we're on at the moment, page 3, please. Uh, 7th of June 2010 to you. If we scroll down, from Keith Simpson, MP for Broadland, enclosing a letter which he's received from a constituent, Margaret Callow, asking you to look into the points and report back. And if we go over the page to page 4, please. Mrs. Callow congratulates Mr. Simpson on his success and says that she wrote to him on the 3rd of March on behalf of my daughter about her treatment, along with others, at the hands of the post office. She says it's a problem that will not go away. They have a copy of a recent letter sent to Alan Bates by you. That's obviously the letter that we've just looked at. And she says, clearly Mr. Davey is neither interested nor helpful. Whilst he prefers to distance himself behind such a reply, I respectfully suggest that all the ministers in government are there to represent us and best help us. It's to be hoped that matters will be taken up on our behalf. As the government excuse me, holds 100% shares in Post Office, this means that we, the public, own them, so that the validity of your reply is questionable. Therefore, I would hope you could speak to Mr. Davey or his department to ask him to look at the issue again. Ought this letter to have been, i.e. the cover letter from Keith Simpson, if we go back to page 3, and its enclosure to have been brought to your attention?
Yes, it's a letter to me from an MP.
Yes, and ought there to be a reply to this?
There should have been.
So that was the 7th of June. Can we go forwards, please, to WITN 1061 0110? This is a parliamentary question of the 22nd of June 2010 from Priti Patel to ask the Secretary of State, so that's addressed to Mr. Cable, what representations he's received from JFSA in the last 12 months, if he will meet representatives of the Alliance to discuss Post Office's Horizon system, and if he will make a statement. and then you reply. And is that sometimes how it works, that although the written PQ was addressed to the Secretary of State, one of his or her ministers would be given the responsibility of replying to it?
That's right, and the draft parliamentary answer, written parliamentary answer, would be in another file in the red box, and you would go through them one by one.
Was there just the parliamentary answer, the draft answer in the box, or did that come with a submission?
No submission.
Sorry, no submission?
No submission, no.
Again, how would you judge the accuracy or appropriateness of the answer if it came just as a single sheet of paper?
Well, you were reliant on what your officials were telling you, and one would expect, and certainly it was my experience, that they would draft a reply that was factually accurate and reasonable.
You say in your reply, given Post Office's responsibility for negotiating contractual terms and conditions with sub-postmasters, I've asked David Smith, the Managing Director of Post Office, to respond directly to my honourable friend, and a copy of his reply will be placed in the libraries of the House.
Yes.
That seems to be repeated twice for some reason. So here, the reply suggests that you had, or somebody on your behalf, had asked the Managing Director of Post Office to respond to the question raised.
Indeed.
But the question was to ask the government what representations it had received from JFSA in the last 12 months.
Indeed, but I was assuming...
Why would Mr. Smith know the answer to that more than government?
Well, I was assuming that was the way that it had been done on the basis of what advice officials were giving me.
What do you mean you're assuming that was the way it had been done? What's the it?
The response to those types of questions.
But the question's asking you what representations the Secretary of State has received. Why does passing that on to Mr. Smith help with the answer?
Well, I had assumed that those representations would always go to the Post Office themselves, and that was the way that it operated because of the arm's length relationship.
I see. So that because you assumed that the any previous communications would themselves have been forwarded to the Post Office was in the best place to answer how many
Indeed.
requests it had received for, or representations it had received from the JFSA.
I assume they'd all been passed to the Post Office. At this stage, trying to understand my job, I was very, very reliant on the advice I was being given.
Can we turn to POL 00417098? And page 17, please. I think this is a draft reply to a PQ, is that right? Maybe if we just pan out. Thank you. If you look under the tram lines, it says draft answer. And then at the foot of the page, excuse me, there are some approval boxes. Can you see that?
Yeah, I can.
So is this the kind of thing that would come in the red box?
Yes.
The thing we saw before was an actual parliamentary question answer. This is the stage before that, the draft, is that right?
To be frank, Mr. Beer, I don't know whether they all said draft before I read them off, or whether signed them off, or whether they didn't say draft. I'm not sure if it was quite that methodical.
Okay. It's from Priti Patel again. Question, to ask the Secretary of State how many times ministers have had discussions with the Post Office on the Horizon system. Answer: Horizon is an operational responsibility of the company, and I have had no discussions. That's you answering. It's an established convention that ministers of one administration can't see the documents of a previous administration. I'm therefore unable to provide the information requested. And so that was, that's accurate, obviously for you hadn't had any meetings at this time.
Yes, that's accurate.
Thank you. And then can we go forwards, please, to page 15? Third question from Priti Patel, with again a draft answer. To ask the Secretary of State for Biz if he will review the effectiveness of the Post Office's Horizon system and if he will report his findings to the House. Your draft answer: I've asked David Smith, the MD of Post Office, to respond directly to the Honourable Member, and a copy of his reply will be placed in the House libraries. So again, that's essentially maintaining the operational responsibility point, is that right?
Yes, indeed.
Can we turn on, please, to WITN 1061011? Um, 8th of July, from Priti Patel, to ask the Secretary of State for Business what his most recent estimate is of the cost to postmasters and sub-postmasters of errors in the Horizon operating system, and if he'll make a statement. Your reply: I've asked David Smith, MD of Post Office, to respond directly to the Honourable Member, and a copy of his reply will be placed in the House libraries. So it's essentially the same answer as the previous one, maintaining the operational responsibility for Horizon being a matter for the Post Office line. Is that right? Can we move forwards to the 12th of July, please? Poll 00417098. And page 19, please. A letter to you from Jenny Randerson, Assembly Member. 12th of July now, under the heading Post Office Horizon Accounting Problems. If we scroll down. As a former consultant in the postal services sector, I'm sure you're only too well aware of the accounting problems that have arisen from the Post Office Horizon computer system, which have resulted in postmasters and mistresses suffering financial losses and sometimes even occurring criminal prosecutions because of unexplained discrepancies that have led to shortfalls. She explains in paragraphs 2, 3 and 4 a problem with her constituent. And then if we go down to paragraph 5 at the foot of the page, I'm aware that the previous government built up an extremely poor IT record, and it had already entered into a contract with BOI to enable Post Office to provide a range of financial services. And then over the page, please. I'm sure you will agree that the apparent inadequacies of the Horizon computer system and the injustices it has caused need immediate investigation and resolution. And I would welcome your advice as to the government's intentions in this matter. Again, ought this to have been passed to you for a reply or a draft reply provided to you for signature?
Yes.
Can we move on, please? Poll 0041 7099. A letter to you of the 20th of July 2010. I've been approached by my constituents. I'd be grateful if you could look at the matters raised by my constituent. And then if we go over the page, please. I should have said this is from Alan Michael MP. This is the letter from his constituent saying, I'm writing to you with regard to the way I've been treated by Post Office. Second paragraph, at the end of the day, the root cause behind the problems I had with Post Office was entirely due to their fault-ridden Horizon system. I'm not alone in suffering from a system which is prone to errors, has negligible support, is inaccessible to the level required to manage the business. But it's me that is held accountable for its failures and losses. The Post Office is 100% owned by government. Regardless how government try and sidestep its responsibilities, it's the government of today with its silence that ultimately approves and sanctions the atrocities that Post Office has inflicted on me and sub-postmasters. There has to be an independent investigation into how Post Office has abused its power. And then next paragraph, mention of the JFSA, and then it's signed off. Again, all this to have been supplied to you by officials for a reply and or a draft reply provided to you.
Yes.
Can we move on, please? Poll 00417098. And this is an email exchange in which you're not included. If we look at the foot of page 1, please. Between Oliver Griffiths and of the SHIEX and David Smith, MD of Post Office, with Mike Whitehead of SHIEX copied in, with the subject of justice for sub-postmasters. Dave, that's to Mr. Smith. As we discussed briefly on Monday, there's been recent interest from MPs in purported cases where the Horizon system has left sub-postmasters out of pocket. We have to date said that this is an operational matter for POL and resisted calls to impose a review of Horizon. Just stopping there. Do you think the replies to all of the letters that I've shown you would have maintained that line, i.e. Horizon is an operational matter for Post Office and a resistance to any call for a review of Horizon?
I can only presume they did.
Mr. Griffiths continues, we are in theory happy to continue holding this line, but if we do so and it turns out that there have been problems with Horizon, then there will be significant political heat. Grateful, therefore, if you could let me know how confident the Post Office is that there is nothing behind these claims. And then if we scroll up, the MD's PA, Tracy Aberstein, replies, Mike Granville will liaise with you to prepare a brief for Oliver to give the reassurance required, ! This is the kind of thing that went on beneath the surface and you didn't get to see, I presume?
No, not at all.
Would you agree that this is, looking at it now, an important exchange?
Yes, it is. And we'll no doubt go on to other important exchanges behind the scenes, which certainly weren't brought to my attention.
If we just look at the bottom of the page, SHIEX are saying we're happy in theory to continue to hold the line. If it turns out there are problems, then there will be significant political heat. Grateful to know how confident Post Office is there's nothing behind the claims. Do you agree that this shows that there was no requirement in law for government to adopt the position it did, that Post Office was an arm's length body and that all matters relating to Horizon were operational ones for the Post Office to answer? That was just a line.
That is what he is saying in that, and there is no doubt, as I showed myself, that ministers could ultimately ask about these sorts of questions. And when I did ask to see Mr. Bates, Sir Alan Bates, to ask about these questions, no one said I couldn't.
And so it was a matter of choice as to whether and to what extent government got involved, rather than the law prohibiting it, correct?
That is true. In these early days, I was reliant on the advice, and I thought that was the case. But as we'll no doubt come on to with Mr. Bates' second letter, Sir Alan Bates' second letter, I decided I would see him, despite what I'd been told.
Would you agree here, reading this exchange, that what appears to matter to SHIEX in deciding whether to hold the government line was the government's confidence in whether there was anything in the claims or not?
That's how it reads.
Is this the extent of the testing that you would envisage had gone on in testing the accuracy, strength, truthfulness and reliability of what Post Office was saying to government, i.e. an email exchange between three people saying, tell me how confident Post Office is that there's nothing behind the claims, and then an email from a PA back saying you'll get a brief?
Well, I'd have thought that by the time they gave me advice, they needed to be certain that advice was true. And no doubt this inquiry will make a judgment about whether or not they did enough to find out whether what they were telling me was true. But ministers have to rely on being told the truth. And therefore, people briefing them need to be sure that the minister is being given the truth.
Would you expect something more from SHIEX, putting it bluntly, to say, please, Post Office, who people allege is something is wrong with your system, tell us whether you're confident that there's something wrong with your system?
It certainly looks like there could have been more probing, yes.
Can we move forwards, please, to poll 0029 4957? We're now on the 26th of July. There's a letter to you from the then Chancellor of the Exchequer, George Osborne, writing in his capacity as a constituency MP. He says that his constituent, Mr. Walters, has written to me about errors on the Post Office computer system, which he believes led to the termination of his contract. He and others in a similar position excuse me, have joined JFSA. I enclose a copy of his letter. We go over the page. He says that he's writing to Mr. Osborne in relation to the way he's been treated. Second main paragraph, unfortunately, a few months after my contract was terminated, the Post Office closed as part of the government cutbacks. He says it was a set-up. Next paragraph. Do you think it's strange that not only I, but many other sub-postmasters have experienced the same thing, that nearly 300 sub-postmasters have been suspended for similar offences as we speak? It's all right expecting the poor sub-postmasters to make good any shortfall, but what happens when they're thousands of pounds under, which is obviously a computer error and cannot be right, yet they're expected to make good this loss? Those that cannot are treated as criminals and sentenced as such, because the Post Office say they've taken the money, although the Post Office cannot produce such evidence to support these claims. The saying that innocent until proven guilty does not come into it. Penultimate paragraph on that page, at the end of the day, the root cause was due to their fault-ridden Horizon system. We're not alone. Last paragraph on that page, the Post Office is 100% owned by the government, regardless of how government tries and sidesteps its responsibility. It's the government of today with its silence that ultimately approves and sanctions the atrocities. You can see some similar language here from an earlier letter. Yes?
Yes, indeed.
Again, should George Osborne's letter have been provided to you by officials for a reply?
So I'm surprised it wasn't. I can't, in the pack that I've been filed, I can't see any reply from me to this.
Can we move? When you say you were surprised, is that in particular because of the personality of the author?
Actually not. I think when an MP writes to a minister, my understanding was that the minister would reply to the MP. That was the sort of understanding that one acted on and one one thought was the case. So one might not reply to members of the public, and officials might reply to that because there's so many letters coming in. But I had assumed that any letter to me as a minister from an MP would get a reply from me.
Can we go forwards, please? UKGI 3014108. And if we see at the top, it's from Valerie Vaz MP, dated the 29th of July. It's about her constituent, Jasvinder Kaur. And she says, second paragraph, there have been a number of sub-postmasters and mistresses who appear to have been subject of a fraud investigation. There's some instances of transactions which appear to be inaccurate, causing suspicion on the sub-postmasters and mistresses. The Horizon system, this is the Horizon system which appears to be ridden with faults. This has a detrimental effect on the sub-postmasters and mistresses who formed JFSA. I'd be grateful if you could let me know if you're aware of other cases of postmasters and mistresses who've used the Horizon system who've then been prosecuted for fraud. That's Ms. Kaur, has asked if it's possible for an inquiry to be set up to look into the Horizon system. Again, this is the kind of correspondence, it being an MP letter, that should have been passed to you for a reply.
Yes.
Thank you, that can come down. In your witness statement, you tell us that as a minister, when MPs raise matters with you, you, quote, inevitably take them more seriously. There was a small trickle of correspondence and parliamentary questions from MPs on this issue. None of these seemed to raise any issues that fundamentally questioned the advice I had received from officials and the Post Office.
Yes.
Is the small trickle, the 4 parliamentary questions and the 5 letters that I've just shown you?
That's what I'm referring to. If I didn't see those letters, which she doesn't, if you look at the pack that's been provided me from the time I was a minister, the number of letters that I signed that came into my file was, I think, smaller than the number of people who had written in via their MPs.
Can we look at an example of a response to the letters that you received from MPs? UKGI 3013913. This is later, this is February 2001. And if we scroll down, 2011 or 2001, you say, thank you for your letter setting out concerns raised by constituents about Horizon. The issues raised in your letter are, however, operational and contractual matters between Post Office and individual sub-postmasters. I should make clear that neither I nor the department can intervene in cases which are sub judice or where court action has been determined. Whilst blame has been laid in a number of cases on the Horizon system for the financial discrepancies and shortages which have led to sub-postmasters having their contracts terminated and subsequent court action, the Post Office continues to express full confidence in the integrity and robustness of the Horizon system. The system operates in all branches, has done so for over 10 years, processing out up to 750 transactions a second at peak times. The system and the processes around it offer a very high level of security and resilience and are designed to ensure that should part of this system or equipment fail, the integrity of accounting records is always maintained. It's proven to be very robust since its introduction. It was fully tested at the time of the nationwide implementation. All new software releases are also subject to rigorous testing. For example, testing the latest upgrade of the system was independently assured by Wipro as being, over the page, best practice. As regards ongoing performance, the information security management systems are accredited to industry standards. Transaction log is available for every branch. Full audit logs of all systems and user activities are securely sealed, backed up and retained to provide an evidential investigative repository. The system's based on principles of double entry bookkeeping. If we go over the page, please. I think that's the end. So you see, thank you very much. You sign, or would have signed it off. You see here, this is still taking the, in the first paragraph, the line that Horizon is an operational issue. The government maintains an arm's length relationship with the Post Office, and it's therefore for the Post Office to answer.
Yes, though I should add that by this time, in February 2011, I had had the meeting with Sir Alan Bates in October, and I had asked my officials to ask Pol a whole series of extra questions. So by this time, when I was writing, while that was still my view, because it was the law from the 2001 Act, I felt, certainly the officials drafting my letters must have felt, that I had made those inquiries following the Sir Alan Bates meeting. And so the letters seem to be a bit more detailed by this time.
You mentioned again the 2001 Act. I think you mean the Postal Services Act 2000.
Oh, I beg your pardon.
That's all right. And you said a number of times that it was what the law required. What did you understand the extent of the prohibition or the limits of the prohibition on government becoming involved in the affairs of the Post Office as imposed by the 2000 Act?
I guess it was more on the day-to-day operation, and when there were strategic issues, policy issues, then we ought to get involved. And as it will no doubt come to, when I had the second letter from Sir Alan Bates, although I wasn't advised to meet him, the number of people who, having engaged in that second letter, it did seem to me that this was becoming more than an operational matter. There was something that I needed to find more information about.
Because you see here, this doesn't simply stop at the first paragraph saying
Indeed.
This is a Post Office matter. It essentially adopts the Post Office account.
Yes, it does. From my perspective as a minister signing that, by this time, I had done and made my officials look further at the issue. But you're right, we were still referring back to the 2000 Act.
So by this time, because officials had looked more deeply into the issues raised, it was permissible and not contrary to the law to adopt the Post Office's account in a reply to MPs.
No, I'm not saying that, Mr. Beer. I guess I'm saying that the officials felt able to put more into the reply.
But what they put into the reply was essentially the Post Office account.
Indeed.
And so the prohibition isn't operative at this point. You don't stop at paragraph 1.
No, the officials, given I had asked them to look into it, could have been looking into it more.
Can we move to the meeting, or move back to the meeting with Sir Alan Bates on the 7th of October 2010 and start with what was the precursor to it, which was Sir Alan's second letter. That's UKGI 3016099. And we should find a letter, that's it, of the 8th of July 2010. So it's in the midst of that slew of correspondence and PQs that I showed you. Dear Mr. Davey, I have to say your response to me dated the 31st of May 2010, that's the one we've looked at, regarding the very serious issues I had raised, was not only disappointing, but I actually found your comments offensive. It seems that though there are new politicians in post, the government has not changed. The letter you sent is little different to the one I received 7 years ago from the minister responsible for post offices at that time. And so many more lives have been ruined in the interim because of that same attitude. It's not that you can't get involved or cannot investigate the matter. After all, you do own 100% of the shares, and normally shareholders are concerned about the morality of the business they own. It's because you've adopted an arm's length relationship that you have allowed a once great institution to be asset stripped by little more than thugs in suits, and you have enabled them to carry on with impunity regardless of the human misery and suffering they inflict. You can listen to your civil servants telling you these issues are really an operational matter for Pole to deal with. You can even listen to the Post Office telling you Horizon is wonderful, that there has never ever been a problem, it is inherently robust, and these are just a few malcontents trying to cause trouble. Or you can meet with us and hear the real truth behind Horizon and what the Post Office is actually up to. Your civil servants and Post Office will not tell you about Post Office staff harassing sick ex-sub-postmasters, demanding written promises of money, or they'll send the police round. They won't tell you that Post Office watches Post Offices heading into trouble, fails to provide any help, then waits until the problem shows a loss of £20,000 or more, so that the sub-postmaster then falls foul of the Proceeds of Crime Act. They won't tell you that when someone wants to sell their post office and has a suitable buyer, Post Office will turn down the applicant to drive that business into the ground. You won't hear about sub-postmasters endlessly requesting audits of their offices and having to wait for up to 5 years for someone to turn up in offices turning over £5 million a year. Neither will they tell you of the cases where Post Office have run an audit, closed the Post Office, bankrupting the owner who loses his business, house and family, holds a pending court case over him for 18 months, then drops the charges and walks away. Nor will they tell you about how they're stopping sub-postmasters selling on the Post Office side of their business in order to recover their original investment. They won't even tell you that the Horizon system is designed to entrap sub-postmasters so that they can easily finish up in prison just by trying to open the day after a trading period balance. This is just a taste of some of the practices your company is carrying out in your name, day after day. They brandish a big legal stick, fail to provide evidence in court, and rely on the clause in the 94 contract about a sub-postmaster being liable for any loss from their office, however it occurs. Yet it's their shoddy Horizon system that is the root cause of all this. The Post Office themselves lose thousands of pounds from each of the Crown offices that they run using Horizon, though their staff are not treated as guilty until proven innocent, but a sub-postmaster is. The whole of this scandal is teetering on the edge of a precipice at this point in time, but it is still not too late for you to reconsider convening a meeting to discuss the issues involved if you are prepared to keep an open mind. Can we turn up paragraph 25 of your witness, page 25 of your witness statement, at paragraph 104, please? Page 25, paragraph 104. You say, I recall being shown that letter by officials, probably in my private office, and being asked what I wanted to do, realising that Sir Alan was quite cross with my initial reply, and reflecting on the seriousness of the concerns he was raising, I told my officials I wanted to meet him. I do not remember what, if any, what, if any, advice my officials gave me at the time, but I did meet Sir Alan on the 7th of October. I note that Mike Whitehead's briefing of the 5th of October 2010 stated that officials recommended offering a meeting for, quote, presentational reasons. As far as I can remember, that briefing, long after the meeting had been arranged, was the first time that presentational reasons for the meeting were mentioned to me. They were certainly not the reason I decided to meet Sir Alan Bates following his second letter. As set out above, I told officials that I wanted to meet him because I could see he was cross in my initial response and wanted to hear his concerns directly. So, in summary, you're saying that the meeting was arranged because you decided that it should be arranged. You could see from the content of his letter that he was angered by your reply, and you deny that presentational reasons, as per the briefing of the 5th of October, played a part.
Yes, that is my recollection. I should add, Mr. Beer, that in, I think, one of the bundles that came quite late to me, I noted an email from Mike Whitehead to Post Office Limited telling them that I had asked to meet JFSA, where he said that I had done that on the basis of the second letter of Sir Alan, and being told that Channel 4 News were thinking about some...
Going to come to that in a moment.
But the point was, and he added, and I had given no advice for that meeting. The reason why I bring that to your attention, the inquiry's attention, Sir Wynne, is it sort of confirms my recollection, because I'm having to recollect issues from 14 years ago. I do remember my official from my private office coming in to me, talking about this letter, showing me the letter, and me making the decision there and then that I ought to meet him.
Can we look at the two pieces of evidence in turn then, starting with the briefing of the 5th of October 2010, UKGI 6062. This is the briefing of the 5th of October 2010, 2 days before the meeting was going to take place. We're going to come back to the substance of the briefing after the afternoon break. I just want to look at one part of it at the moment in relation to this narrow issue of the reason for agreeing to meet. And can we look under background to the meeting? We scroll down. Thank you. Background to the meeting. And can you see in the third line, Mr. Whitehead says to you, that's Alan Bates, second, more confrontational letter of the 8th of July was followed by reports that Channel 4 were planning to run a news item on the JFSA campaign. We then recommended offering a meeting in response to this second request for presentational reasons against the background of potential publicity, the Channel 4 news item, playing heavily on a government minister, quote, refusing to meet victims of government-owned Post Office Horizon system, which has systemic faults, resulting in wrongful accusations of theft or false accounting. So just dealing with that piece of evidence to start with, in terms of accuracy, it's right that Sir Alan wrote a second letter on the 8th of July, isn't it?
That's correct.
It's right that that second letter was more confrontational than the first.
Very much so.
It's right that it was followed by reports that Channel 4 was going to run a news item on the JFSA campaign.
I now understand that to be the case, yes.
But you say it's wrong that the recommendation to you was that the meeting was to be agreed to for presentational reasons.
That is wrong. I have this memory of this meeting with my junior official from my private office, and there was no submission or recommendation for a meeting. It was my decision.
Do you know why Mr. Whitehead would say that the recommendation to you was to agree to a meeting for presentational reasons if that was false?
I don't know.
The problem, would you agree, with agreeing to a meeting for presentational reasons is that it may suggest that there is in fact little or no interest in the subject matter, but instead the guiding light is how it all looks to the outside world?
That's what it would appear, but that was certainly not in my mind. And I repeat from my statement that the first time I saw this would be in my red box of October. I took the decision to meet him in July, 2 months into my term of office.
Meeting for presentational reasons would all be a bit plastic, a bit synthetic, wouldn't
Totally.
it?
And it's worth adding at this point, Mr. Beer, one of the things that was in my mind in accepting and asking for the meeting was because there had been an organisation set up, the Justice for Sir Postmasters Alliance. Seemed to me that a number of people had come together, and while a minister could not respond to a court case involving an individual sub-postmaster, it seemed reasonable to meet a group of people who'd come together. and with his second letter, understanding a little more 2 months into office who he was, and there'd been these written questions, and because began to be an issue coming across my desk, I felt it was the right to meet him.
Was the meeting agreed to because Channel 4 had picked up on the parliamentary questions?
No.
Can we look, please, at poll 0041 709 7097? This is the email that I think you were referring to a moment ago, Sir Ed. It's dated the 28th of July 2010. So remember that Sir Alan's letter was the 20th of July 2010, his second, more confrontational letter. Mike Whitehead of SheX writes to Sue Huggins and Mike Granville, who are both at Post Office, and Oliver Griffiths and Rosemary Buck, who are both at SheX, and says, further to our discussion on Monday, Ed Davey has said that the JFSA should be invited to meet him in. He took this view on the basis of the 20th of July letter from JFSA and the briefing on the expected Channel 4 news item, and without further advice from me. And then there's some other information that's not relevant to our question. This is a record, would you agree, which suggests that you took a view, i.e. decided, to meet Mr Bates in part because of a Channel 4 news item that was expected, doesn't it?
Well, it's his reporting of a oral meeting between my private office and myself. I've no doubt that the private office mentioned there could be a Channel 4 news item, but the letter was the substantive reason, because it was a very strong letter. And I had no, as he goes on to say, there was no advice from him, there was no written submission advising me whether or not to take the meeting. The meeting was decided by me in my office, having read the 20th of July letter.
The email records that you took the view on the basis of ... the expected Channel 4 news item. If that's correct, that would be agreeing to a meeting in part for a presentational reason, wouldn't it?
It would be. What I'm telling you is that I do have a recollection of this because the second letter was so strong, because 2 months into my posting, I was beginning to understand there might be an issue here. I was beginning to understand that GFSA was an organisation representing a number of sub-postmasters, and it felt reasonable to meet them, having spent a number of years campaigning on behalf of sub-postmasters. To have a letter in the way that Sir Alan Bates wrote it struck me very strongly, and so I wanted the meeting. I have to say, a possible Channel 4 news item was not something that was particularly troubling to me.
So there are two pieces of evidence, would you agree, that record that the reasons for meeting Sir Alan included a reason of how it would look?
There's the submission, and I remember being rather irked by that bit of the submission when I read it, but we were about to go to the meeting, and it was the substantive points that I focused on. But Mr. Whitehead wasn't at the briefing with my private office, and he's taking that, no doubt, from report from the officials who were there.
Thank you, Sir Ed. Sir, could we take the afternoon break, please, until 20 to 3? Sorry, 20 to 4.
Oh, yeah, certainly, yeah.
Thank you, sir. Can you still see and hear us, sir?
Thank,
Thank you. Sir Ed, can we look at two documents at the same time, please, on the screen? The first document, please, poll 308-8974. And then UKGI 6062. Thank you. You'll see on the left-hand side is the briefing that was provided to you for your meeting on the 7th of October. It's dated the 5th of October, written by Mr. Whitehead. Can we turn in that document, please, to page 3? And do you see under the heading Integrity of the Horizon System at the foot of the page? Can you see it starts with the Horizon System has been in place for over 10 years. Then if we go over the page, that paragraph ends in the system. Next paragraph, the system's currently being updated to Horizon Online, ends with Horizon System. Next paragraph, integrity of both Horizon and Horizon Online is built on tamper proofs, ends in branch accounts remotely. Next paragraph, critically, Horizon creates a separate audit file, ends in at the time concerned, scrolling down. Sub-postmasters are trained on the system, ends in update the accounts. Next paragraph, as with any large organisation, ends with ensure ongoing accuracy. Then a new heading, action taken, begins with Post Office Limited has a regular system, ends with undertaken by the NFSP, and then all of the paragraphs to the end, in fact, the end of the document, no court has ever ruled there have been problems with the Horizon system. Just going back to the start of that, on page 3, where it begins. Scrolling down, thank you. There. When you read this, or when you would have read this, would you have expected that some system or process for verifying the accuracy of what you were being told had been undertaken?
Yes, I would have assumed I was being told the truth and that it was, from my officials, the best information they could provide with me.
You see that the way it's presented to you is, as a matter of fact, that this is the single truth.
Yes.
It doesn't say Post Office allege to us the following. It doesn't say Post Office say to us the following, or we've asked for a briefing from Post Office and they have provided the following.
It doesn't say that.
No. And so would you read this as this is essentially being SheX's own account to you?
Yes.
On the document on the right-hand side, can we see a brief to Biz? We know this is from the Post Office. It's dated August 2010. It's a brief to Biz for your prospective meeting with JFSA. And in that document, can we go please to page 2? And can we see a heading Integrity of the Horizon System and a paragraph that says the Horizon System has been in place for 10 years? Yes. And then on the left-hand page, if we can scroll down, we can see the next paragraph, the system's currently being updated, and on the right-hand side, the system's currently being updated. And then the left-hand side, the integrity of both Horizon and Horizon Online, and on the right-hand side, and so it goes on. The entirety of the information in the sections that I've read you appears to be a cut and paste from the Post Office briefing. They've right-clicked, swiped, cut and paste, or copied and paste. Is that what you would expect to have happened by your officials when they were briefing you, and not attributed it to Post Office?
It is not what I'd have expected. When I saw these documents in the bundle sent to me, became obvious that there had been that cut and paste, as you say, and it surprised me.
Why is it surprising that officials would simply swallow whole what the Post Office were telling them by cutting and pasting an account into a ministerial briefing?
I'd have thought they would have had a meeting and but probed a bit, because this meeting had been planned for. I'd asked for it in the July, 2 months after coming into office. It didn't happen till the October, so there was plenty of time for them to prepare. And given there'd been a number of written parliamentary questions and letters, this is a very important meeting to me, and people knew that, and I would have expected a quality brief.
We can get rid of the document on the right-hand side, please. Turn to the meeting itself, and on the document on the left-hand side, go back to page 1. Thank you, and scroll down. Thank you, just stop there. You'll see that in the attendees are listed Sir Alan and then 2 lawyers, one from Shoesmiths and one from Coomber Rich, called Izzy Hogg, a Basingstoke-based firm of solicitors who've defended a number of sub-postmasters who have been prosecuted by Post Office in recent years. That this was a meeting on the 7th of October, and we know that Izzy Hogg was Seema Misra's solicitor, and that Seema Misra's trial started a few days later on the 11th of October 2010. We also know that, through other evidence, that David Smith of the Post Office and the executive team at the Post Office were watching the trial very closely. Was, to your recollection, Seema Misra's case and her impending trial discussed at the meeting?
I can't remember, but I think in the reply that I gave to Sir Alan, there was a reference to it. So I think that
reply.
In the 7th of December reply, but that may have been because he wrote 2 letters subsequent to the meeting, and it may have been in there. And I'm sorry, I don't know, but I can't remember it being raised at the meeting.
We haven't got a note of the meeting. I think you understand, or haven't been given a note.
I asked the department for minutes and all the submissions from my diary, and they weren't able to give it to me.
And same here. Would you have followed the lines in your briefing?
By and large, yes. The lines were the key lines that I took from them was that, as they say, being listening mode, and their reason for that was there was a possibility of a court case, and they were said that it was prudent to, as you see in there, prudent to adopt a sub judice approach in the comments you make. I don't know how many questions I asked. I certainly was keen to listen and hear their points of view.
If you look at our objectives at the foot of the page, you're advised by Mr. Whitehead that tactically we would advise you to seek to establish at a very early stage whether legal action against Post Office is imminent or planned. If so, it will be prudent to adopt a sub judice approach in the comments that you make. Did you read that as being a device, i.e. to establish the concurrency of court action, therefore giving you an additional reason not to commit to anything?
Well, I'm not sure of a device. I assume they were giving me their best advice, and they
Just
may
the sentence begins with the word tactically.
Well, they may have been wanting to protect me as a minister. I don't know. But it's difficult, Mr. Beer, because I can't remember exactly all the details of that meeting. I can remember how I considered Sir Alan. I'm happy to go into details about that. But I don't always follow the advice of my officials, and that's why the meeting was taking place. The
advice continues that you should emphasise that the issues raised by the GFSA are operational and contractual matters for Post Office. Make clear that government, as shareholder, has an arm's length relationship and doesn't have any role in the company's day-to-day operations. Establish whether legal actions contemplated or committed to taking place. If so, note it will be for the relevant process, a legal process, to decide on the GFSA case, and that the issues are effectively sub judice. And then over the page, please. Demonstrate you're prepared to hear GFSA's side of the story. GFSA claim both Post Office and officials are covering up the problems with Horizon, but make clear that you are not in a position to offer substantive comment, and then to avoid committing to setting up an independent or external review of Horizon. Do you think you're likely to have followed those lines?
I'm pretty sure I would have followed those lines. Yes. I might well have asked one or two more questions than they wanted, but it was a meeting which Sir Alan had wanted to put his case.
Under the heading Issues or Elephant Traps, in bold, Mr. Whitehead says we recommend you should be primarily in listening mode on the basis that any statements or comments made at the meeting may subsequently be quoted in any legal process involving JFSA or its members. Did you remain primarily in listening mode?
I would have certainly been in listening mode for most of the meeting. My normal practice would probably to have asked one or two questions for clarification, but I'm afraid I can't remember the details of the meeting.
Did you make any commitments in the meeting?
I can't remember making, certainly not commitments to things like a review, but I've committed to come back to him, I would imagine, on the substantive points he was making. And no doubt we'll get on to that. I certainly...
Did you agree to do or require others to do anything?
Well, after the meeting, I asked my officials to follow up on all his points. I found Sir Alan a very reasonable and credible representative. He had a strong story, and I felt it needed to be looked at again. The submission that I received, and we can no doubt go through other parts of it, it made a powerful case, because it wasn't just based on what my officials were telling me about Horizon, but it was also referred to the National Federation of Postmasters' view, and the courts had not found problems with Horizon. And those were three reinforcing points that he made in that submission. But because Sir Alan was a very articulate and able champion for his case, I still felt, despite this submission, that more work needed to be done to reassure me that what was in the submission was true.
Can we turn lastly then to poll 00186759? This is your letter to Mr. Bates of the 7th of December 2010. I'm going to skip over the contents of the letters that you referred to earlier in the interest of time. You say, following our meeting, second paragraph, the points you raised as chairman are being followed up on my behalf by officials as part of our dialogue with the company. However, as I made clear, neither I nor the department can intervene in cases which are sub judice or where court action has been determined, as in Mrs. Misra's and Mrs. Buffery's cases. Given that one of the principal complaints was the conduct of the Post Office, which had led to court proceedings and convictions, how could officials follow up matters on your behalf if they could not intervene in cases where court action had taken place?
Well, the basic understanding that I have of the court practice is that the executive arm of government, be they officials or ministers, can't interfere, shouldn't interfere, and I wouldn't seek to interfere with the judicial process.
Was anyone asking you to, or your department, to interfere with the judicial process rather than examine the conduct of prosecutors?
I think they were wanting to... Well, to be fair, I remember Jonathan Lord in particular, the Member of Parliament for Woking, making it clear to me that they weren't asking me to intervene and knew that I couldn't. But in terms of the prosecution process, that wasn't, to my understanding of the meeting with Sir Alan, the core part of his questioning. The core part of his questioning seemed to be around issues to do with Horizon.
You say in the third paragraph here that you realise the core of JFSA's concerns relate to the Horizon system, ... However, Post Office continues to express full confidence in the integrity and robustness of the Horizon system, and also categorically states there's no remote access to the system or to individual branch terminals which would allow accounting records to be manipulated in any way. And I think you now know that that itself is a cut and paste from information provided from Post Office.
Indeed, I do now know that.
A bit like before. I'm not going to spend time in showing you the documents because I think you will have reached that conclusion yourself. Again, are you disappointed that your civil servants have simply swallowed what they've been told by Post Office by cutting and pasting, in this case, an email into a draft letter to you, for you?
Particularly at this point, because having asked for the meeting with Sir Alan, having had the submission that I did, but then saying I still think these points need to be looked into, I think that was an invitation for them to look rather harder.
Thank you. At least on this occasion it says the Post Office continues to express, so it's attributing that which follows to the Post Office. Can we turn lastly, so far as questions from me are concerned, to your witness statement, please? It's the end of your witness statement concerning your reflections. And it begins on page 41. If we scroll down. You deal with your reflections in 6 subheadings. If I can look at those briefly with you, because we've got your statement on the record. Start at page 42, over the page please, foot of the page, duty of candour. Do you there argue for the consideration of the introduction of a duty of candour, given that this was addressed yesterday in the King's speech?
I do. I strongly support it.
I'm not going to ask you further questions about it, but you add your heft to that call. Is that right? Can we look at the foot of the...
Sorry, I was told not to nod, so yes.
That's a yes, is it? Thank you. Look at the foot of page 43, please. The second point that you make concerns the oversight of arm's length bodies, and you speak to that issue between paragraphs 142 and 143. Can you explain what you are suggesting, please?
Well, clearly, one of the big problems that arises from this tragedy and this appalling miscarriage of justice is how the executive arm of the government, the department, oversees arm's length bodies. That's come up in your questions today, Mr. Beer. Now, when we reformed Royal Mail Group and split off Pol, I insisted that there should be a sex official on the board, although that wasn't welcome, I'm told, but I insisted on it. And it follows from that I'm a big believer in improving corporate governance and greater transparency. I think the lesson from this appalling situation is we need possibly to go even further, and government should look across the piece to all arm's length bodies to check that the governance is appropriate, so the oversight is genuine, real and thorough.
The third reflection that you make is over the page, at page 44, concerning the relationship essentially between the executive and the judiciary. And if we skip forward to paragraph 149 on page 45, you posit the creation of a new process. Can you explain what you have in mind?
Well, it seems to me that if there is a real concern about too many prosecutions going through the court system that shouldn't be, that there needs to be a process within government for officials, for ministers, to raise questions. There is a real balance, though, and I'm sure Sir Wynne will appreciate this. You don't want to give ministers power to abuse the court's independence. So I don't quite know what that might be, but I'm positing that should be at least looked at. But I go on to say it would be far preferable if there were reforms within the legal profession, the judiciary, to learn the lessons from what happened, rather than allowing the executive to intrude into the judicial arm.
Thank you. Suggestion number 4 at the foot of the page is in relation to prosecutorial powers. And what you say there is contained in those two paragraphs, 151 and 152. And you make the general point that it seems to you that prosecutions are best left to the CPS, who are independently investigated.
Indeed it is.
Over the page, please, suggestion number 5. The suggestion, I think, to strengthen the protection afforded to whistleblowers.
It is, because it seems to me in this case the critical piece of evidence for the High Court, and you saw it in the ITV drama, you saw it, although I didn't see it at the time, at the Panorama, BBC Panorama in August 2015, the key thing was the evidence from Richard Roll. And we've seen in other scandals, it's been the whistleblower that's been fundamental to that. And other countries have much stronger protections for whistleblowers than we do. And indeed, I mentioned this in the House of Commons yesterday, we do need a much more robust system to enable and persuade and encourage and support people coming forward when they see that lies are being told.
And then lastly, number 6, if we scroll down, please. To summarise, you say in paragraph 156 that you think that the idea of mutualisation of the post office, which you describe as radical, might offer a productive way forwards.
Yes, the post office network is really important for our society, and our country, and our economy. And sub-postmasters, in my experience, are cornerstones of our community. And I actually argued at the time, the idea came from the National Federation of Sub-Postmasters, but it reflected ideas that my party had put in the coalition agreement, that we should look at mutual models. And so, although it wasn't in any briefing, it wasn't from officials, I put into the Postal Services Bill, I think it was Clause 7, the enabling power for, in the future, the post office to be mutualised. And that would mean that sub-postmasters were in control and there would be no such thing as Pol. And as we look forward, the post office is so important, the sub-postmasters and the community. We need to find a way to strengthen them, support them, and rebuild the trust in that institution. And it seems to me mutualisation offers a way forward. I legislated for it, so I hope that could be taken forward.
Sir Ed, thank you very much. Those are my questions. Sir, there are some questions from core participants. Mr. Maloney first, I think, up to 15 minutes. Mr. Miss Page second, up to 10 minutes. Mr. Steen third, up to 10 minutes. And then Miss Watt on behalf of the NFSP, up to 3 minutes. So it's about a 4:35, 4:40 finish.
We'll see.
Thank you very much, sir. So Mr. Maloney first.
Sir Ed, I'm over here. Thank you. Sir Ed, my name is Tim Maloney, and I represent a large number of postmasters, all of whom are prosecuted to conviction, and all of whom have subsequently had their convictions quashed. Sir Ed, you received a number of letters from MPs on behalf of postmaster constituents. And you're now not following your own lessons, which is to say yes rather than simply nodding. Would you say yes rather than simply nod?
Oh, yes. Yes, I did receive some letters.
Thank you. And you sent a number of letters in response?
Yes, I did.
Yeah. You've told the inquiry that these letters in response were drafted by officials and you examined them and signed them, was the usual process.
Yes, that's right. There would be a file of letters in my red box between 20 and 25, and I would sign them. Yes, essentially I would sign them most nights.
Would you, and those letters would cover a wide range of subjects, not simply postmasters?
Oh, a huge number of subjects. As I say in paragraph 14 of my evidence, I was responsible for a range of things from employment affairs to trade, to competition policy, consumer affairs, and I had a large variety of issues. And within Royal Mail and Post Office, in the postal affairs umbrella, there were a number of other issues raised, not just Horizon.
Of course. Would you always just sign the letters, or might you sometimes raise matters with officials that you'd like checked?
Very occasionally I wouldn't sign them. That was very unusual, but occasionally I wouldn't sign them.
So far as the letters to MPs about postmasters were concerned, were many of those pro forma?
Broadly speaking, that's true. But there was always a little bit of difference. But they followed the same lines, the sort of things that Mr. Beer had been talking about.
Precisely. And Mr. Beer showed you the letter to Karen Lumley, MP. Yes. And might we just look at that again, just very briefly? That's UKGI 30-13913 as a good example, just to see the format that it takes. And if we could just focus it, thank you, and scroll up if we can. Yep. So essentially thanking for the letter as the first paragraph. Then the issues are operational and contractual, and the Minister and the Department cannot intervene in cases where, which are sub judice or where court action has been determined, essentially confirming what you said earlier, that the Minister could not respond to individual cases of sub-postmasters, individual court cases.
That's true.
Yeah. And then there's mention there of the blame on Horizon. Then next paragraph is where how widespread Horizon operates. Next one is the testing of Horizon, and so on.
I think I should say, to be as helpful as possible, that I think, and I haven't analysed them in huge detail because there weren't that many,
Sure.
but there were some before I met Sir Alan, some just after, and some after I'd replied to him.
Yeah.
And I think you'll see a little bit of difference in the replies that my officials drafted.
Sure. I don't suppose you recollect sending a letter concerning a Mrs. Alison Henderson to Norman Lamb, MP, do you?
No.
Right. Mrs. Henderson sent a letter to Mr. Lamb and asked that it go to the relevant minister. And that letter was then forwarded to Vince Cable initially, but then it came to you. Can we have a look at Mrs. Henderson's letter, which is POL 2094731? Now, that's the covering letter, which from Norman Lamb, who was your successor, in fact, wasn't he?
Yes, he was.
And this forwards the letter of Mrs. Henderson to Vince Cable, as we can see there. But it eventually came to you. If we go on to the next page, we see the substance of Mrs. Henderson's letter. And then if we could scroll up, in the it's addressed to Mr. Lamb. It's November 2010. The first paragraph is the reason for Mrs. Henderson writing. The second is her history of being postmaster at Worstead, leaving Worstead and in Hertfordshire and becoming a postmaster. The finding of £18,000 missing from her office, reduced to £11,000, and she's now facing a trial at Norwich Crown Court, accused of theft and false accounting. She says in the next paragraph, I've never taken a penny from the post office, but the prosecutors from the post office do not believe me. Essentially, they're saying that there were post office prosecutors there. Do not believe me, hence the trial. I was aware some time ago that the figures were wrong during a weekly balance. Some £4,000 appeared to be missing. I tried to find the missing amount without success, and due to the fact that the post office helpline was less than helpful, decided to roll over the figures, hoping that an error notice would be issued from Chesterfield and the matter resolved. This did not happen, and for some reason the figures just seemed to get larger. Post office counters are adamant that there are no issues with any part of their IT systems, and are demanding that I pay back the apparent missing money as well as face a trial. If we could go over to the next page, which I believe is blank, and then onto that final page, thank you. My office, and this is the first full paragraph on that page, my office surprisingly escaped the last round of closures, but now instead of having to pay me a redundancy sum, my reputation, excuse me, has been wrecked, and I face the prospects of a possible prison sentence, heavy fine, or some other criminal punishment, plus having to pay the post office a large sum of money. Money that was never taken from the office, but just seemed to vanish into cyberspace. Your reply to that is UKGI 000-13863. And could we put that up, please? UKGI 000-13863. And might we try also to put up the letter to Karen Lumley MP next to it, which is UKGI 30-13913. Thank you. Now, we can see the similarities between the letters, but there are also some important differences. We see the paragraph thanking. First paragraph is thanking as before, and the issues raised paragraph is the first 4 lines are the same in each letter, but then there's further detail added in relation to Mrs. Henderson's case that I'll come back to. We then see at the third paragraph, the Horizon Computing Accounting System operates, and we see that at the bottom of the page on Mrs. Henderson's letter. If we scroll up on both letters, on the final paragraph, yes, thank you. we see the Horizon system was tested, and we see the Horizon system was tested as the first paragraph on the second page of Mrs. Henderson's letter. As regards ongoing performance, we see as the second paragraph on both, and then the system is based on the principles of double entry bookkeeping. So very similar. But if we could please just go back to just Mrs. Henderson's letter on the screen now, and to the paragraph dealing with it's the second main paragraph on the first page. That's it. And so if we could, I don't know if it's, well, if we just focus in on that second main paragraph in Mrs. Henderson's letter on the right-hand side of the screen, the issues raised in your letter are, however, operational. That's great. Thank you very much. The issues raised in your letter are, however, operational and contractual matters between Post Office Limited and Mrs. Henderson, and I should make clear that neither I nor the department can intervene in cases which are sub judice or where court action had been determined, essentially consistent with your evidence this afternoon. However, it goes on. I understand that Mrs. Henderson was charged to appear at Norwich Crown Court on the 15th of December 2010. I further understand that she pleaded guilty to false accounting, Paul having dropped a charge of theft, and the court imposed a sentence of a community penalty order with unpaid work of 200 hours and £1,500 costs. Mrs. Henderson also repaid the shortage, and I understand at no time during the case were any problems with Paul's Horizon IT system raised by Mrs. Henderson or separately identified. So in this case, in Mrs. Henderson's letter, it does comment on an individual case. It gives the circumstances of her pleading guilty, and moreover goes on to say that she didn't say anything about Horizon. Do you accept that, Sir Ed?
That's what it says in the letter.
Indeed. And would you accept that the comment has the effect of saying that, well, while Mrs. Henderson may be alluding to the unreliability as the cause of her problems in the letter to you, Mr. Norman Bell MP, she didn't do so in the proceedings against her when it really mattered?
Well, I assume when my officials drafted that, that was what they had in their mind, yes.
Yeah. And you'd accept, would you, that such a comment would be likely to undermine the trust that Norman Lamb, her MP, might have in her sincerity?
Yeah, I feel very sorry for Mrs. Henderson and frankly all the sub-postmasters and misters who've been so badly affected by this miscarriage of justice, and this clearly would not have helped.
No. Now, I asked you at the start whether, whilst officials wrote letters for you, would you sometimes raise things if you thought you might have to be careful about things and so on? Did you raise anything in this instance?
No, I didn't.
Why would such a point-scoring comment be included in a letter from your department, essentially saying, look, this woman is complaining about Horizon, but when she went to court, she didn't? Why would a comment, a point-scoring comment of that nature, be included in a letter from your department?
I don't know.
It might be viewed, mightn't it, as siding with Post Office.
It can certainly be interpreted that way, absolutely.
Did you think at the time that it was right to send a letter like that?
I generally can't remember, I can't recall signing this letter. And if it gave offence to Mrs. Henderson, I apologise to her.
Right. Do you know where that information came from about her not saying anything about Horizon?
No.
No. Well, can we just please look at the judgment of the Court of Appeal Criminal Division in the case of Hamilton and others, which is POL 20113-278. That's POL 20113-278. And the first part of this judgment I'd like to look at is paragraph 116, which is at page 29 of the judgment. Here we are. And could we scroll up just a bit so that we can see what's beneath that paragraph as well? That will really help. Thank you, that's perfect. The appellant, Alison Henderson, pleaded guilty to false accounting and Paul offered no evidence on a charge of theft. Before agreement was reached to that effect, Paul's prosecuting lawyer gave instructions to counsel that a plea to false accounting on the basis that Horizon was at fault would not be acceptable. In her case, it's conceded that it was improper to make the acceptability of her basis of plea conditional on her making no issue of Horizon. And since the theft charge had been dropped, Post Office could no longer advance a case that she'd stolen any money, and it should have been open to her to suggest that there's no actual loss and she'd only covered up a shortfall created by Horizon. If we could then move forward 6 pages, please, to paragraphs 156. And if we could see the whole of that page, thank you, that's enough. Here we see more details in relation to Mrs. Henderson's case. There are the circumstances of her plea, as reflected in your letter. At 157, we see that, in fact, Mrs. Henderson denied theft, and this is 5 lines in. Denied theft, but accepted that she was contractually obliged to make good any discrepancies, was making efforts to do so. In an amended signed defence statement served on the 16th of November 2010, Mrs. Henderson said that it was her belief that any discrepancy, quote, was a result of a malfunction of the Horizon computerised accounting system. Any discrepancy could have been discovered by the Post Office auditor, and so on. If we go further down, please, so that records what was in her defence statement and gives the lie to what was said in your letter just from the outset, as it were, Sir Edward. We then see, though, in paragraph 159, that at the end of September 2010, Mr. Wilson wrote to an investigator essentially saying that a plea on the basis of Horizon unreliability would not be acceptable. If we could go down to the next paragraphs, please. And at 160, he says it in terms, clearly, if there were to be a plea to false accounting, but on the basis that Horizon system is at fault, then that would not be an acceptable basis of plea for the prosecution. And then there is discussion. It was absolutely plain that Mrs. Henderson was raising Horizon all the way through this case. And what was in your letter was a complete travesty, you can see now, can't you?
What you've shown me is quite shocking.
Yep.
Clearly, I was asked to sign a letter which is clearly wrong. I didn't know that at the time. I believed the letter to be true.
Plainly, the only checks that were done were with Post Office, weren't they?
It looks that way.
And Post Office did not tell the officials the truth, did they? It can't have done, can they?
From what you've shown me, they can't have done.
But it looks like officials were more than happy, without question, to include a completely untruthful slur on Mrs. Henderson in the letter in order to undermine her position.
It looks that way.
Yeah. And, Sir Edward, you signed it without question as well, didn't you?
Indeed, and I apologise for that. I have to say, when you are signing letters, you are working on the basis that people are telling you the truth. Yeah. That's the only way that government can work. It's one of the reasons why we need a duty of candour.
Yeah.
It is shocking that people have misled ministers, misled postmasters above all.
I'm sure you can, but can you understand the hurt that must have caused Mrs. Henderson?
Of course I can, and I apologise to her.
And I ask you this question about the more general statement you've just made. Was it appropriate, is it appropriate, for a department to only go to, for example, Post Office for information when it's Post Office that is being challenged?
And I think what comes through what you've just shown me is that I think if departments are quoting court cases, they should go back to the court case.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Maloney. Who's next?
It's me, sir. Thank you.
Yeah.
Mr. Davies, on the subject of lies, this lie originated in what the inquiry knows as the Ismay report. It goes like this. The integrity of Horizon is founded on its tamper-proof logs, its real-time backups, and the absence of, quotes, backdoors, so that all data entry or acceptance is at branch level and is tagged against the logon ID of the user. This means that ownership of the accounting is truly at branch level. Mr. Beer has taken you to the way that that lie found its way into the Whitehead briefing to you, and it was a copy and paste from a post office briefing, which was a copy and paste from the ISME report. And the rest of the Whitehead briefing was really aimed at persuading you to fob Sir Alan off. Do you agree?
I think that they wanted me to just listen and not ask questions, yes.
In effect, the officials closed ranks with the Post Office against the JFSA and the sub-postmasters. Would you agree with that?
It's really clear that the officials were following the line from Post Office Limited. That is really clear in the way you've described the ISME report finding its way into what was sent to me.
That report was commissioned, the ISME report, by David Smith, who you met with regularly. And Mr. Smith was also, as Mr. Beer said, keeping a close eye on the Misra trial, which started a few days after the meeting that you had with Sir Alan. Mr. Smith was delighted with his team for securing the conviction against Mrs. Misra. He apparently, or at least the team apparently, believed that it vindicated Horizon that Mrs. Misra had been convicted. Did you ever raise the JFSA complaints directly with David Smith when you met him?
That's an interesting point. When I got the letter to Sir Alan Bates of the 7th of December, which was essentially my response to the questions he'd asked at the meeting, which I'd asked to be followed up and checked. I'm assuming, because it would be my normal practice, that I would have discussed that with either an official or with a member of the Post Office, in this case, David Smith. I have racked my memory to see whether that was raised, and I assume I did it, but I cannot remember the precise meeting or the precise discussion.
How regularly were you meeting with him at that sort of time in the latter end of 2010?
I generally don't remember. I don't think it was that frequent. Most of my meetings at that time on postal affairs were to do with the bill and the Royal Mail Group. But I remember meeting him on one or two occasions. He was not a frequent attendee.
Sorry.
I don't want either Sir Edward or you to be on a false premise here. My recollection is that Mr. Smith's tenure as managing director ended in 2010, but I stand to be corrected.
You're quite right, sir.
Correct.
I wouldn't want Sir Edward to think that there were many, many months when he was in post, that was all.
No, you're absolutely right, sir. He was only there for a short time during the period, but obviously covering this period of autumn 2010.
Yes, certainly, yeah.
Can I then just turn to the letter that you wrote to Jonathan Lord and the background to that, Jonathan Lord being Mrs. Misra's MP. Mr. Lord wrote to you about the Misra case, and if I can bring that up, please. It's poll 309-4279. I haven't been able to find a very good copy of this letter, but one of the points that is raised within it is remote access, albeit in a slightly roundabout way. And if we go, please, to page 7. And if we zoom in at the bottom of the letter, we can see how he raises it. Penultimate paragraph and the final sentences. I know that the Horizon system has had a great amount of problems since its introduction, and the majority of postmasters have blamed it as a defence in court cases. And then this, I also gather that access to the system is possible remotely through the Post Office's network. And it seems that that has been picked up by Mr. Whitehead, because if we could then please go to poll 20417094. He sends an email to Post Office following up on that. And if we look at the bottom of page 1 and going into page 2, there's the email where he picks up on it. Thank you. It's 26th of November, and he says, Mike, thanks. Re the Lord/Misra case. Can we quote Poll as categorically stating that there is no remote access to the system or to individual branch Horizon terminals, which would allow accounting records to be manipulated as JFSA claims? So it's very specifically about the Misra case. Do you see that?
I do.
Your reply to Mr. Lord dealt with remote access in a very similar way to the letter that was written to Sir Alan, touching on the same subject, which has just been shown to you by Mr. Beer. And both of those letters were based on the wording from the poll briefing that you received. So to save time, I'll simply give the reference for the letter to Mr. Lord. It's SMIS 50268 at page 3. And it begins with that same, or at least the passage on remote access has that same categorical refusal to accept it. Poll also categorically states that there is no remote access to the system or to individual branch terminals, which would allow accounting records to be manipulated in any way. So that same wording is used as in the letter to Sir Alan. Now, that letter will have been received by Mr. Misra when Mrs. Misra was in jail, because it was forwarded on from Mr. Lord. And you can imagine how that would have broken his heart.
It's been dreadful for him.
An interesting point is on the same day as the Post Office briefing was sent, which that letter was based on. So this is the 2nd of December of 2010. There seems to have been another communication going on about these cases. And if I can bring the reference up, it's poll 20295322. And this seems to indicate that Mr. Whitehead was asking further questions from Post Office. And it says this, Mike, further to your query, so this is from Post Office to Mike Whitehead. So evidently Mr. Whitehead has raised a query. Confused, of course, by the fact they're both called Mike, but evidently this is referring to Mr. Whitehead raising a query. Further to your query, the position is that Post Office acts as a private prosecutor in relation to the specific criminal case, adhering to the Code for Crown Prosecutors and all statutory or other rules in relation to prosecuting offenders. It should be noted that legislation gives the Director of Public Prosecutions the right to take over and close down a case if they regard that as appropriate. I hope that this assists. And if you look a little further down, you can see that this is on an email chain related to Save My Wife. That's because that was the way that Mr. Misra had headed up various emails that were then being sent around. So clearly it seems that whilst seeking some information about the Misra case, there was also a question raised about whether or not these were private prosecutions. Do you think you asked that question?
No,
Where do you think that might have come from?
I don't know. Presumably within checks.
It's a telling question, isn't it? Given that most people at this time within most of the evidence we've had is that people outside of post office, and sometimes even people inside post office, it may surprise you to hear that even Mrs. Venables claims that she didn't know that post office was forming private prosecutions at this time. And yet clearly somebody has asked the question and been given the answer. Why do you think that didn't filter out?
I don't know. I found quite a lot of things I've been reading both shocking and surprising.
The key thing is that people were being sent to prison by a state-owned entity. And that should have demanded real scrutiny, shouldn't it?
You should indeed.
And it just doesn't seem to have happened, does it?
Well, I am disappointed that the questions I asked were not put more forcefully and we didn't get the answers. I had assumed that I was being told the truth.
Did you ever hear about the Misra case in any way other than the letters that we've seen? Obviously not recently. I'm talking about back in the day.
I can't remember beyond the letters. I'm sorry, I can't be precise about what I knew about an individual case.
Do you remember hearing at all about Mrs. Misra being sent to prison when pregnant?
I generally don't, I'm sorry.
Thank you. Those are my questions.
Thank you, Ms. Page.
My name is Sam Steen. I'm going to ask you some questions. I don't think they'll be that long. Can we go to document RLIT 40251 and page 67 of that document? And if we can centre on 5B, if we go further down, so page 67 of the document on relativity, that is. Internal pagination would be page 287. Thank you. Now to explain, Sir Edward, this is a part of the infected blood inquiry report. The report itself was delivered on the 20th of May of this year. And you'll see there at 5B the part that I'm going to quote, starting with the heading for that paragraph, ending a defensive culture in the civil service and government. Now, this is before the King's speech, which you replied to yesterday, and it's the report in relation to infected blood, whereby government lines were kept for many, many years, undisturbed by investigation. Okay? So 5B says this: if on review the government considers that it is sufficient to rely on the current non-statutory duties in the Civil Service Code, it should nonetheless introduce a statutory duty of accountability on senior civil servants for the candour and completeness of advice given to permanent secretaries and ministers, and the candour and completeness of their response to concerns raised by members of the public and staff. Yesterday in the Commons, you explained that on behalf of the Liberal Democrats that you welcome the promised Hillsborough law with its statutory duty of candour on public officials. You went on to say this: but we urge the government to go further in this area. For the moment, then, let's just pull two pieces together. You can see that from the infected blood inquiry report, that the reference to the duty of candour is not only in relation to candour itself, i.e. tell the truth, which might be thought as a basic minimum, but also for completeness of advice. I've got a feeling you're going to agree with my next question. From the evidence and the questions that you've been asked today, you can see that there is a need for completeness of advice to include making sure that advice is right, not that you are being told what people believe is the truth because another entity tells it so. In other words, there's got to be something that actually looks into this. Do you agree?
I do agree, strongly.
Now, how to do that is not easy. Government needs to be able to sort out that the difference between someone that refers to the passing UFO, forgive me any extraterrestrials watching, but it might be a different question to looking into the issues that relate to an organisation which is prosecuting its own people. And there needs to be some type of body that is capable of carrying out investigation. That would have to be backed up with some power. In other words, some powers to conduct an investigation and for other people to answer those questions. Do you again agree?
Yes, although for clarity, can you say a little bit more about what you're proposing?
Well, government's going to have to consider a way of not only looking into things, but also getting answers. That may need a power of compulsion that the courts have in order to call for evidence and documents, perhaps instruct experts. So do you understand that from all of the evidence that you've given today, the sorts of questions that you've been asked, you need to go further than just making sure that officials are telling what they think is the truth? You need to look into it.
I agree with that.
And to look into it, you're going to have some power to get some answers.
Yes, I mean, in the way, for example, a select committee has powers to call evidence and force people and call for papers, and to cross-check between what witnesses are saying. On a matter that's as serious as this, when people are being prosecuted, losing their livelihoods, their homes, and being so appallingly affected, there absolutely has to be those powers and that ability. I mean, if I was in government looking at this, I would want to make sure we learn from these various scandals and we restore the public trust in the system. The system has clearly failed on a most shocking way, and has to be reformed and root and branch.
And that must be done in a timely fashion. Peter Holmes was a branch manager, Jesmond branch of the post office. He was convicted in 2010, not long before you took up your post. He had been a police officer in Jesmond. His area was his beat. He had had a hotel there. His great love in life was with his family taking drives out of the country. He was a modest man who wanted to work to support his family and provide a service in the area, and hence he was a branch manager at a post office. I mentioned timeliness of investigation. He died in 2015. His name was cleared in 2021. Do you see what I mean?
I absolutely do. I mean,
Not only must there be an investigation, consideration of these matters that are serious, but it must be done so that where there is wrong, that wrong is identified.
Absolutely. I mean, I hope you don't mind, Sir Wyn. I have 3 constituents I'm representing now whose lives have been very severely affected by this scandal. I'm obviously not going to name names, but listening to their stories, like the one you've spoken about, like so many, justice demands that we change the systems to make sure this can't happen again.
Agreed. Sir Edward, you're not in government. You are now the leader of the 3rd largest party in government. You have increased weight and increased influence in government. Will you use that weight in influencing government to try and push through so that there is something done in this area of duty of candour plus? In other words, take it that step further.
Yes, I hope when Sir Wyn finalises his report alongside the Hillsborough recommendations, the contaminated blood scandal recommendations and others, the government implements those recommendations. And if it does, it will have the full support. Indeed, we will champion them. And I mentioned earlier another reform that we are championing, namely an office for the whistleblower, because I do think that's another important element of the reforms. There are many we need to make. We can't just rest at the legislating for duty of candour, important though that is.
And yesterday you mentioned the question of whistleblowers and stronger protections. What we've seen here within the Post Office inquiry is that for many, many years, sub-postmasters were not brought within whistleblower protection by the Post Office. Now, we think that that is because that they were agents of the Post Office and didn't have employee status within the legislation. There are many people that work as agents, there are many people that work as consultants that are not protected by the whistleblower legislation. That is another area that I believe that you may well agree needs concern, needs attention and needs change. Do you agree?
Yes, I agree.
Thank you, Sir Edward.
Last series of questions, I believe.
Thank you, sir. Sir Ed, I ask questions on behalf of the NFSP. I think obviously you mentioned the NFSP in your statement and the former General Secretary, George Thompson, and the inquiry has heard what he had to say about his position on Horizon. I want to ask you, though, about some of the other representative bodies or unions that you met with to find out what you gleaned about Horizon there. Paragraph 28 of your statement, you say you met with the CWU 12 times and the NFSP 9 times in your 2-year tenure. And the inquiry heard evidence in June from the CWU's Tony Cairns that during the relevant period of Horizon, there were approximately 9,000 employees in Crown Post Offices using the Horizon system, and those employees would likely, perhaps not all, but likely have been CWU members. It's accepted there were prosecutions and dismissals arising from Horizon data of Crown Office employees, and that there was an increase in prosecutions for them, albeit not at the level of the sub-postmasters. So what I wanted to ask you was, when the CWU came to meetings with you, did they raise anything about Horizon in those meetings?
I can't remember them doing that at all.
Do you remember if you ever asked them about Horizon?
No, the only thing I can remember, it was an informal meeting with George Thompson from the NFSP, amongst many other issues, because we were dealing with the bill and network transformation and so on. I did ask him about Horizon, although my brief had already told me that they didn't agree with the JFSA, but I wanted to hear it directly from him. And so I asked him, but it didn't come up at any CWU meeting.
And it didn't occur to you to ask, given that these people working in Crown Post Offices are actually Post Office employees, effectively civil servants?
Well, all I had been told, and it's there in the Mike Whitehead submission, that the Crown Post Office weren't reporting any problems with the system.
Thank you. Those are my questions.
Thank you, Ms. Watt. Is that it, Mr. Beer?
Sir, it is.
Well, thank you, Sir Ed, for making a full witness statement and for answering a great many questions both before lunch and after lunch today. I'm very grateful to you for so doing.
Thank you, sir.
And we'll resume again at 9:45 with Ms. Swinson. Is that correct?
That's right, sir. Thank you very much.